Now that we have the veridicality account on the table, and I think it captures very well the folk intuition that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, that I think the way you put it, that our senses or our eyes are a window onto reality as it is. I think it's a good time now to move to the FBT theorem, or the fitness beats truth theorem. So why and how does it tell us that natural selection, which produced our brains and consequently these perceptual system we've been talking about, does not favor veridical perceptions, maybe as evidenced by some of the examples we've been discussing, like the Australian beetles and the limbal rings?
Right. So it turns out that you can use evolution by natural selection as a mathematically precise theory. There's something called evolutionary game theory. So there's no hand waves now. This is a mathematical instantiation of Darwin's ideas, evolutionary game theory. And you can ask a clean technical question using that mathematics. The question is this: what is the probability that natural selection would shape any sensory system to see any true features of objective reality? Clean technical question. You can ask that of the math. And the answer that comes back is clear as well. It is precisely zero. The probability is precisely zero that any sensory system has ever been shaped to see any aspect of objective reality truthfully. Probability is precisely zero. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. It means that you would bet the farm that it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It could happen, but the probability is zero that it will happen. And one way that you can see that is evolution. When you think about evolutionary game theory, there's something, when you play a game, like a video game, if you try to win in the game, you try to get points as fast as you can. You're trying to do whatever you do to get points. And if you get enough points, you go to the next level of the game, right? Well, in evolution, evolutionary game theory, there's something about what do you have to do? How do you get points in evolutionary theory? Well, ultimately, the ultimate payoff is that not that you go to the next generation, but your genes. You have kids. Your genes go to the next generation. Okay, but what corresponds to the payoffs? Well, or the points in the game is something called payoff functions in evolutionary theory. So when you have games, you have payoffs. If I have this strategy in a game, I'll get this payoff. If I do this strategy, I'll get this other payoff. So payoff functions then in evolutionary theory are functions that take an organism, its state, its action, and the state of the world, and they give you a payoff. If this organism is in this position in the world, and the organism is in this state, and it takes this action, it gets this many payoff points. Maybe payoffs go from 0 to 1,000, whatever you want it. And that's the way evolutionary game theory works. It is you have different strategies. So when an organism is in this situation, if it does this, the act of doing this, that's what we call a strategy. If you systematically do this kind of thing in this situation, that's a strategy. And the payoff function gives you what kind of reward points will you get for that strategy. So in evolutionary theory, you're just having various strategies compete with each other, and the strategies have different payoffs, and you then do the game theoretic analysis to see which strategy will dominate, will win over the other strategies. Well, so we looked at, there's several ways to prove this FBT theorem, but one way that I think is the cleanest is to just say, look at those payoff functions. They depend on the state of the world, so they're a mapping from the world, whatever the world is, into these payoff values, say 0 to 100. Now, if that payoff function is going to allow evolution to shape my sensory system to see some truth about the world, then the payoff function better preserve some information about that truth of the world. In other words, that if the payoff functions that are the only thing that's guiding my evolution, they're the thing that determines whether I live or die, whether my strategy lives or dies. if those payoff functions have no information about some feature of the world, then I can't be tuned by those payoff functions to the feature by the world, except by accident. But they will not tune me to it, right? I might accidentally go to it, but there will be no selection pressures to it. So mathematically, what I just said is this. What is the probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism of some structure in the world? So there's some structure in the world. What is the probability that the payoff function preserves it mathematically? That is, what does it mean? What is the probability that it's a homomorphism? So it turns into a clean mathematical question. You can take any structure you're interested in. So maybe a total order, like 1 is less than 2 is less than 3, that's a total order. Or a partial order, or a metric, things, distances, a metric structure, or a topology structure. There's all kinds of different structures that you can imagine might be true of the world. And you can say for each one of those structures that might be true of the world, what is the probability that a generically chosen payoff function is a homomorphism, contains information about that structure? That is a clean mathematical question. And so I took it to a brilliant mathematician friend of mine, Chetan Prakash, who I've worked with for 35 years. I worked on it a little bit, but he's the real mathematician. If it were just me, it wouldn't have been done. And the answer is, in case after case, every case that we've looked at so far, probability is 0. The probability, in other words, if you look at the set of all possible payoff functions, and you can write them down, say I have 100 possible payoff values, and I say the world has 20 billion states, I can write down how many payoff functions there are and just do the combinatorics. That's how many payoff functions there'd be. How many of those payoff functions would actually be homomorphism? There will be homomorphism. Absolutely. There will be functions that preserve that information. Absolutely. That's not the question. The question is, if we put the number of homomorphisms in the numerator and put the total number of payoff functions in the denominator, and then look at the ratio as the number of states in the world and the number of payoff values increases to infinity, what is the probability of a homomorphism? And it goes to 0. In every case, it goes to 0. In other words, the probability is 0 that a generically chosen payoff function would shape any system to see the truth. Now, one could push back and say, well, maybe you're wrong in treating all the payoff functions equally. Maybe evolutionary theory is biased towards the ones that are homomorphisms. And I say, perfectly fine if you want to go there. That is not standard evolutionary theory. Right. Standard evolutionary theory right now says that all payoff functions are equally likely. So you would have to have a new evolutionary theory, and you'd have to justify it. So what is the new fact about reality, and what is the evidence for this new fact about reality that allows you to put a bias on the set of payoff functions such that the ones that are homomorphic, the ones that actually preserve structures of the world, are more likely? Now, no one has yet taken up that challenge, but if someone wants to take up that challenge, I'd be very anxious to see what the theory was. But right now, current evolutionary theory is very, very clear. I should now immediately talk about two criticisms of the theory that have come out. First from philosophers, and then from cognitive scientists. I get the same criticism almost all the time from philosophers, and that is that I've shot myself in the foot logically. So, and the argument at top level goes like this. Darwin has a theory of evolution and natural selection in which there are real physical organisms competing for real physical resources and really dying in a physical world. Now, Hoffman is using the mathematics of evolutionary game theory to test whether there are such things as real physical organisms or real physical resources. Now, either the mathematics of evolutionary game theory faithfully models Darwin's ideas, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, Hoffman couldn't possibly use evolutionary game theory to disprove these fundamental ideas of Darwin's about, real resources and real organisms. And if it does faithfully, if mathematics of evolutionary game theory does faithfully model Darwin's ideas, it couldn't possibly contradict them. Either way, Hoffman is in what philosophers call an unfortunate dialectical situation, right? In other words, he shot himself in the foot. That's what. So, poor stupid Hoffman, he shot himself in the foot. He used the mathematics of evolutionary theory to shoot evolutionary theory itself in the foot, and therefore to shoot the mathematics in the foot. And so he couldn't be dumber, couldn't be more stupid than doing that. So my reply is that this argument completely misunderstands the nature of scientific theories and the nature of scientific progress. So first, scientific theories. Scientific theories can never be a theory of everything. No scientific theory can ever be a theory of everything. Every scientific theory says, grant me, please, this handful of assumptions. Grant me these assumptions. If you grant me these assumptions, those assumptions give me a scope of problems that I can solve for you. But there are also limits. No theory is a theory of everything. So take Einstein and his theory of space-time, right? He granted a couple assumptions, you get his theory of space-time. And you grant those assumptions. If you grant them, you get all this stuff that he can explain. So there's an incredible scope to his theory. But there's also a limit. And his mathematics tells you the limits. His notion of space-time falls apart at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds. The point of your mathematics. So by the way, everybody knows the story about Einstein, that he had his intuition about general relativity, about being in an elevator and standing on a scale, seeing your weight, and then all of a sudden the elevator cord gets cut and the elevator drops. All of a sudden your weight goes to zero. If you were steady, all of a sudden your weight would be zero. That was his big idea, but it took him 7 or 8 years to take that idea and turn it into the mathematics of general relativity. And he was Einstein. So this brilliant guy, it took him 7 or 8 years to turn the idea into the mathematics. But once he did it, he took his idea, he got the mathematics of general relativity. That mathematics, together with his other work on quantum theory, entails that the very idea behind the mathematics of space-time, that idea falls apart at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds. So the point of the math is this. It tells you the scope and the limits of your fundamental assumptions. And that's the key point. A good scientific theory, when you write down the mathematics to capture your intuition, the mathematics does not succeed if it tells you that your theory is the theory that will never fail. No, that's not the point. The point is the mathematics has really done its job when it tells you the scope and the limits of your concepts. So that's what I'm doing with Darwin's theory. We're using evolutionary game theory to show you there's incredible scope, but there's also limits. The very concept of objects in space and time itself, the theory tells you that is one place where the theory has a problem. And that's beautiful. When the theory points and says, this is a limit of this theory, the very concept of a real physical object being the fundamental nature of reality cannot be correct. Now, what Darwin's theory and my work in evolutionary game theory with Chaitan and others, and by the way, I should mention Brian Marion and Justin Mark and my graduate students and others who work with me on this. What that mathematics does is it tells you the scope and the limits. And every scientific theory is going to have the same issue. Every scientific theory, if the mathematics is done right, will tell you the limits of that theory. But the theory will not tell you what your next move needs to be, right? So Einstein's theory tells us that space-time falls apart at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. Great. Does it tell us what to do next? No. It just says this theory stops there. So we have to take a creative, and that's the fun part of science. You get now, and this is usually the older guys die with their theories, and the younger guys are the ones who jump in and get the new bold hypothesis, right? So you have to then jump beyond the limits of your old theory with new ideas, write down the mathematics, which will have its own scope and limits, but one constraint on your new theory is you better give back the old theory as a special case. So if you can't do that, then there's no reason to take you seriously. I mean, evolutionary theory is not the final word, but it is an incredibly beautiful and powerful theory. We have nothing anywhere close to it. And there's nothing close to it. So if your deeper theory does not give you back evolution with natural selection as a special case, I'm not interested in it. I just have no interest. You're not doing the right thing. And the same thing for whatever is beyond space-time. Space-time is not fundamental. Whatever theory you're going to come up with beyond space-time, be as creative as you want to. Whatever you need to do, drinking beer, taking drugs, whatever it is, to get your idea. But then eventually you have to turn it into math, and you better get back Einstein's special and general relativity and quantum field theory as special cases of this more general theory, or you're just not interesting. You're just not interesting. So that's my reply to the philosophers on this. I'm not in some unfortunate dialectical situation. This is the way science progresses. This is just the way it works. The mathematics, if it properly captures the intuitions of a theory, in the best case, it will then tell you the limits of those intuitions. They will tell you where they stop. And what I'm saying is that the mathematics of evolutionary game theory tells us that Darwin's intuitions were incredible. What a genius. But the very notion of objects in space-time itself, we have to let go. We'll have to have a deeper theory. Now, that's from the philosopher side. From the cognitive scientist side, the common argument that I get is, well, if you have not just one fitness payoff function, but a lot of fitness payoff functions, and you throw the fitness payoff functions at this organism fairly quickly, and then effectively the organism can't be tuned to any one fitness payoff function, and so the best thing to be is to be tuned to the truth. So an organism that's constantly facing a lot of different fitness payoffs, one after another, will eventually be tuned just to the truth. Now, what's remarkable about that to me right off the bat is, first, effectively they're saying the fitness payoffs themselves never actually shape the sensory systems, or they don't shape the fitness payoff functions themselves come and go so quickly that they don't actually affect the selection process. They're not what that actually. So this argument from the get-go fundamentally throws away the whole point of evolutionary game theory. The fitness payoff functions are there to actually talk about the selection process. But I'll just put that to the side. One group said, so we have all these fitness payoff functions, and we're going to say that there's only one mapping from the world. If there's only one mapping from the external physical world onto our perceptual representations, and you have all these changing fitness payoff functions, then you will be selected to see just the truth. That'll be the maximum payoff thing. So I disagree with the argument that there's only one mapping from the external world to sensory representations. In the case of one concrete example is that in vision we have what's called the dorsal and the ventral stream. So in vision you get if I look at like a green apple, I get one representation of the green apple in my dorsal stream, and it's a representation that lets me do one kind of task with it, which is like to recognize what it is. And I get a different one that's the ventral stream. In the dorsal stream, I get a different representation, more about how I can manipulate it, how I can handle it, how I might throw it or walk around it or whatever it might be. So you get the claim that there's only one representation goes out the window. And we actually have multiple representations with all the different sensory systems that we have, right? The different modalities for different representations. And we also have, well, I'll just stop there, but I'll just say, when you allow that there could be multiple mappings from the objective world into your perceptual representations, then you start doing what you can call clustering analysis. So imagine that there are 20,000 fitness payoff functions that are relevant. Well, what you might do is start to cluster them and say, so you do hierarchical clustering and say, well, these payoff functions are very similar, and these are, so let's let's build a mental representation of this group and another mental representation of this group. And I think that's what we did. And that's what we call physical objects. What we call physical, when I see an apple versus a pencil versus a fork, what I'm doing is that's part of this hierarchical clustering. I'm taking all these different fitness payoff functions. I'm grouping them together and saying, this group I will call an apple. This group. So once again, the idea is not that we don't see the truth, but that what's going on is we see roughly 30,000 different kinds of objects, basic level categories of objects. And that's just due to the different kinds of hierarchical clustering that we do, so that we can actually, when we do the hierarchical clustering, then we can get the maximum fitness payoff we can get from that cluster, because the payoff functions are all similar in their function. So when you actually rerun the simulations that these cognitive scientists have run to try to show that we're wrong, rerun the simulations with allowing hierarchical clustering, then you find out that no, truth does not win. The payoffs, the fitness payoffs win.